16th century Europe. Spain and England are engaged in a deadly war for control of the world's oceans. The Spanish king launches a vast armada to invade English shores and overthrow his great rival, Queen Elizabeth I.
What you had between England and Spain was a combination of religion, trade, and power politics. A toxic mix at best.
Driven from England's shores by a ragtag navy of privateers and armed merchant ships, the Spanish Armada is obliterated by storms. Few traces of this great fleet have ever been found. Now, an ancient shipwreck off the coast of Donegal in the northwest of Ireland has been discovered close to the last known location of a ship from the Armada. Could this be a remnant of that great fleet?
You just don't know what conditions these poor sailors are facing. Hostile territory, hostile weather. Hate to think about what they went through before the ship came a cropper here.
Over the course of 4 years, a team of archaeologists and scientists study this mystery ship, opening up a world of piracy on the high seas, political intrigue, and war between the great powers of 16th century Europe. Fire! Ireland's Atlantic coast is notoriously dangerous and has forever been feared by mariners. 400 years ago, one lonely ship found herself floundering on these seas. These waters would be her final resting place. In the summer of 2010, a team of amateur divers were exploring the site of an 18th century wreck when they uncovered the last resting place of a much older ship off the coast of Rutland Island in Donegal, Ireland.
We had agreed that we would start a systematic kind of visual inspection of the bottom to find other bits, and on the first day of that inspection, we had about 8 divers on a rope searching from the north to the south into the harbour. And at the end of that first day, we had found timbers poking up out of the sand, which is now the site of the Rutland Island wreck. I have always said that every dive is a treasure hunt. Doesn't always work out like that, but you always have that stuff in your head.
They realized that this ship was unique for the area.
When the lads came up with photographs of the wreck, it was clear that it wasn't what we were looking for. The timbers looked older.
Irish government archaeologist Connie Kelleher goes to examine Liam's discovery. She suspects that this mystery ship could be from the Spanish Armada.
From our sources, particularly a naval chronicle from 1799, there was references to one of the Spanish Armada wreck being lost in the harbour there. And a further account told of guns being raised from the harbour in 1793 with the emblem of Philip II of Spain on them. So we knew that within the area there was the potential to have a Spanish wreck, and particularly one from the Armada.
In August 2011, Connie returns to the site with a team of archaeologists on board the state-of-the-art research vessel, the RV Kiri. This is the first chance they will have to properly investigate the shipwreck, but the team only have 2 weeks to do so before the Kiri is needed elsewhere. Battling the clock, they need to find evidence that it is from the Armada. Lying in just 10 meters of water, the vessel is exposed to the tides and currents. The team must rescue any objects that have survived in the hull of the ship. Measuring in at just over 20 meters, the dimensions are typical of both merchant vessels and small warships of the era. If the wreck is from the Armada, it is not one of the grand galleons of the fleet. Attention now turns to the underwater archaeology.
At the moment we're excavating fully.
2 divers in the wreck itself. And we're using a combination of hand excavation in the shallower areas, and we're using a suction dredge that's bringing all the material to the surface where we're sieving it. So that even though we're finding a lot of material when we're down there, the smaller material might get through the suction dredge, so then we can catch it when it comes up here.
Oh, we just have 2 bits of lead shot coming up there.
Rex is our planner, our recorder, and he's very artistic. He's a great eye, so he will literally go down there with his drawing frame and his board, and he'll lie down there for as long as it takes, and he'll just plan and record what he sees.
These archaeological drawings will aid the search, allowing the team to log the locations of every find and could even help identify the ship.
We had a special grid fabricated for this project. It's a 6 metre by 6 metre stainless steel grid. It's an excavation grid and it's a survey grid. To begin with, we'll be using it as an excavation grid. So when we're using the water dredge, the dive will be resting on the grid off the surface of the shipwreck where you may have delicate material that gets uncovered through the excavation.
It's 6 by 6 overall, and it's split into metre squares. So within those metre squares, when we excavate out the area, we know exactly where we've excavated, what's come out of that area, and then we plan it according to those metre grids.
We have a little indication there of the positioning, underwater positioning beacons that we also use to help in the surveying of the wreck. And you can see the 2 beacons then where we've attached them to the 2 corners of the grid, which will give us the real world coordinates of everything that's been found down below.
The skipper, Captain Sean, has given me this transponder, which will locate me under the water at any stage. So through the communications, I'll be on hardwired comms back to the dive control. So should I get a target associated with what I think might be the wreck, I'll be able to get an exact location on the seabed of where I am using this transponder, which will be sent back signals back to the boat, and everything will be referenced off the grid. That looks quite nice. You got something there, Jim, have you? Feels like silver.
Yeah. He was excavating in the hold of the ship, and he thinks he's found something, a small object that's silver, which actually may be part of a fragment of a coin, possible reel. Now the reels, they would cut up into sections, so you could have reels of 8, reels of 4, depending on how many segments they made. So they were all currency that they would have cut up, but they were Spanish, which again would be super. If it turns out to be a Spanish reel, it's a Spanish coin, so again it would lend more weight to it being a Spanish ship and possibly an Armada. Certainly a Spanish trading vessel, if not Armada.
Okay, yeah, I'm just going to get a
No, it could be a pirate vessel as well. They had reels of 8 as well.
It's metal.
Yeah.
It's no iron. There's no iron on it, so it's. I actually do think it's silver.
The team believe the silver coin is from Spain. As they excavate, they also turn up pieces of Spanish pottery. Is this further evidence that this is a lost ship from the Armada?
Initially, we wanted to do some small investigation or trenches across the wreck to try and get an understanding, see what material or artifacts might come out of it, and structurally what we might be dealing with. Some of the pottery was clearly of Iberian origin. So that got us thinking that maybe we're dealing with an Armada wreck. We had all these questions, but I suppose the Spanish Iberian pottery was the one that made us think, plus the size and the nature of the vessel looked right for just the structural elements seemed about right and dimensions seemed about right for a ship of that period.
The Spanish Armada was the culmination of an undeclared war between Catholic Spain, led by King Philip II, and the Protestant Kingdom of England, ruled by Elizabeth I, that dominated the 1580s. This conflict was sparked by the Reformation, when these traditional allies found themselves on either side of the confessional divide.
The most critical issue between England and Spain is the position of the Netherlands. A revolt breaks out in the Netherlands in 1572 between Philip and his Dutch subjects. Because of the religious dimension and the quest for freedom of conscience for Protestants, Philip is particularly interested in a stern repression of this rebellion. And it develops into a long-running war. This is the Vietnam of Habsburg Spain in the 16th and early 17th century. As things develop and as it becomes clear that Philip is bent on the complete repression of the rebellion, the English believe that they have to give support to the Dutch rebels because it would be too dangerous to have a complete Spanish victory, which would have an expansionist and hostile Catholic power perched across the narrow seas and in a position to threaten a very insecure Protestant queen.
It's really in the late 16th century, in this era of competition between Spain and England, that the strategic importance of Ireland as a maritime base becomes apparent. A well-known Elizabethan adventurer who had defected from Elizabeth to the service of Philip of Spain, Thomas Stukely, had said, "He who would England win must in Ireland begin."
With her army fighting a war in the Netherlands, and under threat from a Spanish-backed rebellion in Ireland, Elizabeth took her fight with Philip onto the high seas. With only a small navy, the Queen turned to privateers to fight her naval battles.
Ship ahoy! Enemy vessel on the starboard bow! Prepare to attack!
Let's define a privateer. He's essentially a licensed pirate. A pirate preys on vessels of every country. They make no distinction. What sails along is taken, if they can. On the other hand, the privateer is licensed by the government, and in return, the privateer must give a percentage of the proceeds of any successful voyage to the king or to the queen. It was, in a sense, an early example of a public-private partnership.
Prepare to fire! Steady!
They were obviously very aggressive, go-ahead type of people, like Francis Drake, like Martin Frobisher and others. And they went out to the Spanish possessions and either landed on the Spanish territory and attacked their settlements, or they attacked their shipping on the high seas.
Fire!
By plundering Spanish shipping, privateers acquired vast treasures. In 1998, an archaeological dig on Narrow Street in the East End of London led to a surprising discovery. In the 16th century, this area was a busy shorefront dock on the Thames, home to shipbuilders, sailors, prostitutes and pirates. What the archaeologists uncovered was a wealth of prestige goods finer than anything that could be produced in England.
Look at this material here. There's two vessels that come from Portugal. Portuguese pottery don't find, full stop. We have pieces from Iznik, which is Turkey, really very rare to find anywhere else. We've got a Persian plate. These are known from museums. You don't find them in excavations. So all in all, a group of material that screams at you, this is different. This is a symbol of taste, fashion, if you will. These guys like this stuff.
Privateers were the gangsters of the 16th century. They lived outside the bounds of normal society, spending their ill-gotten gains on fine objects, booze, and women. Like modern-day mafia bosses, they saw themselves as legitimate businessmen and merchants.
And so you get trade, and trade shades into piracy and privateering, because all these merchants, for obvious reasons really, go out with big guns. And when you are somewhere where you might want to buy or sell stuff, it really does help if you've got a gun behind you, because it persuades people to play the game that you want to play. You want to buy this or I'll kill you is the kind of approach you encounter. Early capitalism. And the tastes of the early capitalists spread out in front of you.
With the war in the Netherlands reaching a stalemate, and under pressure from privateers plundering Spain's wealth from the New World, by 1588 the conflict was reaching a critical point. King Philip II was losing huge amounts of ships, goods and men. He had to act.
The only way, thought Philip, to deal with the matter was to strike right at the heart of England. And so he conceived a plan in conjunction with his admirals and generals to put together a huge invasion force which would sail up the English Channel, land a really well-equipped, strong army somewhere in England, probably in Kent, which would strike right for London and depose or kill the Queen of England and make England a Spanish-controlled dominion.
Philip II chose the Duke of Medina Sidonia to lead the Armada, a man who had never commanded at sea before. He was a poor choice as leader. As he assembled a Spanish fleet of 130 ships, the Queen put out a call to save her nation. Led by her cousin Charles Howard and the greatest privateer of the age, Francis Drake, a ragtag navy of armed merchants and warships assembled in Plymouth. The English were outgunned, but the Spanish plans had fatal flaws.
A combination of bad luck and bad strategy. The strategy that they had was that the Navy, the Spanish Navy, the Armada, would sail up the English Channel, would anchor off Dunkirk, and from there they would pick up the army of the Duke of Parma, which was the dominant force in Spanish Flanders. And if they succeeded in conveying that army to England, there is no doubt it would have been victorious on the battlefield.
The Spanish were hugely reliant on communications reaching the Duke of Parma in time. In July 1588, the Armada set sail from the port of Coruña. The time of reckoning had come. By the end of August 2011, the team of archaeologists have just days left to complete their excavation for this year. They believe the vessel may be from the Spanish Armada. If she is from that fleet, she would have been geared for battle, but so far they have found little evidence that she was heavily armed. Archaeologist Jimmy Lenihan decides to extend his search to the sands around the wreck. He uses a metal detector to investigate the area to the back of the vessel.
I did get what could be a cannonball. Looked like a cannonball, gave a response for a metal find, but in my hand it actually feels quite light. But I do feel that it is some form of projectile that possibly is associated with the wreck. Now, whether this is a composite of stone with some iron, I'm not sure.
The cannonball Jimmy has found does suggest that this was a warship. Was this ship involved in the battles between the English and Spanish fleets in the summer of 1588? With the metal detector search so far paying dividends, he continues his hunt. Before long, he turns up evidence that this boat has been in a firefight.
We're finding quite a number of bits of lead that have impacted on something. This is the romantics speaking. This could be lead shot from the English that was fired during the big battle of Gravelines off the coast of England that caused the Armada to disperse.
On the 19th of July 1588, the Spanish Armada was spotted off the coast of England. When news reached Francis Drake and the commander of the English Navy, Charles Howard, at anchor in Plymouth, they prepared their small fleet of just 55 ships to engage the Spanish. Over the next 6 days, more and more English ships joined Drake as he harassed the Spanish fleet, but neither side was able to land the killer blow. By the 27th of July, the Armada, bruised but unbowed, were just miles from Calais, where they were due to link up with the Duke of Parma's 30,000-strong army.
But no contact had been made with the Duke of Parma, who commanded the army of Flanders, and so Medina Sidonia, the Armada's commander, decided when they reached Calais, just short of the rendezvous point, to anchor and try to coordinate his operations with the invasion army that was waiting to meet up with him.
With the Armada exposed, the English set alight old ships filled with combustible materials and sent them towards the Spanish.
Most of the Spanish panicked when they saw the fire ships coming at them, and they fled to windward in disarray. However, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, who has been much criticized, showed his mettle at this point, and he gathered together a few of the most powerful ships and got them into formation again and protected the fleeing Spanish fleet.
The Spanish fleet was still a threat to England. Howard and Drake attacked, hoping to destroy the Armada. The Battle of Gravelines had begun. For 8 hours, the English assaulted the Spanish, destroying 5 ships and inflicted heavy damage.
The English, by this stage, had totally run out of ammunition, and there was nothing more they could do to prevent the Spaniards from effecting a landing. But fortunately for the English, the Spaniards didn't know this, and Medina Sidonia took what he thought was the only rational decision.
The Spanish sailed off into the North Sea. Now they could not return because the prevailing wind was against them, blowing up the English Channel. So the Duke of Medina Sidonia ordered his fleet to sail north about Scotland, down the west coast of Ireland, and back to Spain. His last instruction to them was to keep far away from Ireland.
Back on site in Donegal, in the northwest of Ireland, the archaeologists so far have not found any artefacts that can definitively date the ship and tie her to the Armada. They bring in dendrochronologist Aoife Daly, an expert in dating ancient timbers, to help them in their quest.
We have pottery that's being looked at that does look Iberian in origin and possibly late 16th, early 17th century. Yeah. But again, we can't be 100% sure of that. But we have nothing to exactly say what it is. Okay. The advantage of getting her on site is that she can see what we're seeing underwater, and she can look at the timbers on our camera while we're down there, and she can tell us what would be a viable sample for dating. And that will give us a date for the timber and when the ship was built.
So that's the ring. Each ring is
so
that.
You should be able to get a good.
Should be able to get something good, especially if they're wider planks with the same kind of width of rings.
Dendrochronology is the precise scientific dating method for archaeology by using the phenomenon that trees in their tree rings have a climate signal. The climate that affects trees makes the tree every year make a narrow ring or a wide ring. This variation in the tree rings is the code that we use as dendrochronologists to date the wood.
Aoife has taken samples from different parts of the site. By counting the surviving tree rings on these pieces, she hopes to be able to match them to trees grown across mainland Europe, Britain and Ireland. It's a slow and painstaking process that takes months to complete. By the end of August 2011, the dig is coming to a close for this season. With less than half the shipwreck excavated, the team know they have a long way to go. However, the RV Curie is needed elsewhere, and the archaeologists will have to wait until 2012 before they get another chance to solve the mystery. In September 1588, ships from the Spanish Armada begin to find themselves off the Irish coastline. Since July, they had been battling huge Atlantic storms that had broken up their fleet. Over the next month, the Armada is struck by hurricane-like conditions. 25 vessels are driven onto the rocks. Hundreds of sailors were washed up on Irish shores. The English government in Ireland were caught completely off guard.
Muster!
There was total panic because they didn't know this wasn't a fresh invasion from Spain. And these are armed soldiers, the best soldiers in Europe. The time to get them, if I'm looking from the logic of the English at the time, which is not today's mores at all, is when they're exhausted and lying on the beaches, not when they've got a few hot meals inside them and have got their guns cleaned and loaded.
Prepare to march. March.
Over the centuries, the story of what happened to these shipwrecked Spanish sailors was largely forgotten. However, in 1971, a discovery of a wreck site in Kinnigo Bay in the northwest of Ireland changed all that. A team of amateur divers, stumbled upon the remains of one of the grandest ships from the Armada, La Trinidad Valenciana. Their archaeological excavation would reveal one of the most tragic stories of that great fleet. Designed for the calm Mediterranean water, she was not suited to the open sea, and her crew suffered a terrible fate.
She got into trouble fairly early on, and she fell away from the main body of the fleet. And somewhere off the north coast of Ireland, her commander, Don Alonso de Luzon, decided that he had to make for shore because otherwise the ship would probably sink. And he ended up on the coast of North Donegal in a little bay called Glenagivny Bay, and the ship grounded there, remained intact for a few days, allowing most of her people to get off safely. And they then attempted to march overland to the west coast of Ireland, where they hoped they would pick up another Armada ship that would take them home.
The crew of the Valenciana had no idea that their escape off the stricken ship had only put them in even greater danger.
They were intercepted by the local garrison, which was commanded by Irish, but it was largely English, and they had a standoff not far from Derry, and eventually the Spaniards decided that on being promised good treatment, they would surrender. Well, they shouldn't really have done that because the promise was made in bad faith.
The Spanish officers were separated out from the ordinary men and led away as hostages. What lay in store for the remaining unarmed sailors was far more brutal.
Down! All of it! Move! Move!
The remaining survivors were divided into small groups.
Kill them.
At the end of the day, as many as 400 men had been murdered in cold blood.
Even by the standards of the era, it was pretty brutal stuff. It would certainly today be categorized as a war crime, though not in any sense trying to justify it. These were potentially very dangerous people. They were armed, trained soldiers. And I wouldn't have liked to have been in the position to make the decisions that had to be made at the time.
As the English troops moved on to their next victims, by playing dead, some Spaniards managed to escape the slaughter. These lucky few were able to flee the kill zone. They were given refuge by the chieftain Sorley Boy MacDonald. No friend of the English, Sorley Boy was happy to help these wretched men.
See that these people are cared for.
By taking in sailors from the Armada, MacDonald was putting his own life at risk. The English government in Dublin had decreed that anyone who helped the Spaniards would be executed.
The experiences of the Spanish sailors and soldiers who came to Ireland were very varied. Certainly an awful lot of them suffered very grave ill treatment. On the other hand, certain of the Spanish were aided. A number of local lords demonstrated a willingness to help the Spanish.
Amigo, queri con Dios.
Que Dios os bendiga, caballero. Gracias.
The surviving sailors from the Valenciana were lucky to fall under the protection of Sorley Boy MacDonald. He nursed them back to health and sent them to neutral Scotland. From there, they were able to find passage to Spain. They were among only a handful of shipwrecked crew from the Armada to make it home. In August 2012, the archaeologists returned to the site of the ancient shipwreck off the coast of Donegal in the northwest of Ireland. Once again, they only have 2 weeks to carry out their work on site before their mothership, RV Keary, has to leave. So far, The dig has thrown up as many questions as answers. Although they have uncovered Spanish pottery from the hull of the ship and found musket shot and cannonballs that point to this being an armed vessel, they have yet to discover if she is a lost ship from the Spanish Armada. This is one of the most complete wooden shipwrecks ever discovered off the Irish coast. However, this unique piece of archaeological history is under threat from the very marine environment that has protected it for centuries.
We can't just forget about the wreck. That's a site and an artefact in itself. So we've started to consider the long-term preservation of the site. So in order to do that, we're looking at different aspects of that, and one of them is bringing in Dr. David Gregory from the Museum of Denmark. He's a specialist in marine borers and in situ preservation. So he's here to look at the wreck and really kind of give us advice on the different ways we might think about preserving it on the seabed for the future.
Are those the frames coming up there, Brian?
Yeah, they're the...
Normally with wood, we're concerned with two things. We're concerned with the physical processes. So if you have tides and currents that are removing the sand from a wreck site, that initiates more degradation, so the physical degradation of a site. But when I'm working in the lab at home, I'm looking at things like the large organisms that will break down wood when it's out on the seabed, and also looking at the wood structurally at a very fine level to see how degraded the wood is. So we want to see if there is active degradation of the wood, and if there is, how can we maybe mitigate that? What methods can we use to prevent further deterioration?
As he dives the site, David discovers that just 12 months after the beginning of the dig, parts of the boat are starting to show signs of damage.
We've got these gribble, they're a crustacean, and these are very active. On this small piece of wood, there's probably about 100 individual specimens, and they totally degrade the surface of the wood, which, as archaeologists, we don't want to lose that, because we're losing all the tool marks that the shipwrights would have made on the wood. So with this sample, we can see we haven't got very much surface information left, because the gribble have degraded all that. So archaeologically speaking, wood like this isn't very useful. Why the timbers that are so well preserved that we've seen that they're coming down to in the excavation is because they've been under the sand where there's no oxygen present, so they haven't got the gribbles attacking them. They need dissolved oxygen from the seawater, and if we limit the dissolved oxygen in the seawater to these, they won't be able to survive on the site. So in order to try and preserve the wreck for the future, the simplest method would be to rebury it. If the wreck was preserved in this way, it could certainly survive another 400-500 years.
The focus now turns to protecting the wreck for future generations. Having sunk in 10 metres of water close to the shore of Rutland Island, it is clear the ship's bounty was pilfered centuries ago. Only a fraction of her cargo and military paraphernalia has survived. The vessel itself becomes the focus of their research. However, with the RV Curie due on another assignment, they have to wrap up the dig for another year. Now in the spring of 2013, attention turns to the work of Aoife Daly.
I don't need to know the suspected date initially, because dendrochronology uniquely finds the place where it fits. And once you've done that, there's really nothing that can argue against it. You know you have the right date. From the Rutland Island wreck, we took some samples from framing timber and some from planking, and there was also planks that belonged to perhaps ship's furniture. So we're getting a picture of all the different components. Looks like we got some rings anyway. When I initially was able to date the two from the furniture, it was clearly dating with England, but it didn't rule out the possibility that it was an Armada wreck, because it wasn't a piece of the actual ship, it was a piece of furniture which could have come from somewhere else. It still could be a Spanish ship with some English furniture on board. But then when I managed to date the rest of the ship, it was a surprise, because the expectation was that it was Armada. And there's no doubt about it, because it matches so well with such a huge range of English material, that the Rutland Island wreck was made from English wood.
The wood has clearly come from Britain, not mainland Europe, meaning that it's highly unlikely that this ship could have come from the Armada. As Aoife continues her research into the age of the vessel, she makes another startling discovery.
The timbers for the ship were felled within the period 1595 to around 1620. So we have a range, a time range for when the timbers were felled for building of the Rutland Island wreck.
This means that the ship was built at least 7 years after the Armada attacked England. If the vessel is not from the Spanish fleet, where did it come from? The ship could still be a relic from the war between Spain and England, and it may have an even more interesting story to tell. The defeat of the Armada did not end the war with Spain. In fact, it would continue for another 16 years.
The destruction of the Armada was a setback for Spanish naval power. But with its resources, the Spanish Empire soon recovered. And by the mid-1590s, Spain was again in a position to threaten England.
Fuego!
The turning point in the war came not on the sea, but in Ireland. In 1594, Irish lords Hugh O'Neill and Hugh O'Donnell, from Ulster in the northwest of the island, began a revolt that would last 9 years. The Spanish saw the rebellion as an opportunity to strike back at England.
For the Spanish, the war in Flanders, trying to suppress the Dutch revolt, was the key theatre of operations. That's where they focused their main military effort with the Army of the Spanish Road, with their principal commanders. One of the reasons why the Dutch were able to keep going was the substantial supply of men and money from England. To the Spanish, a diversion to Ireland, a second front in Ireland, would divert key English supplies and men from Holland to the war in Ireland. And in that it was very successful. The war in Ireland was a huge drain on English resources.
By 1604, after over 18 years of war, both countries were exhausted and ready for peace. The result was the Treaty of London, an agreement that saw the newly crowned King James I agree to put an end to privateering from British shores.
Privateering, the use of private ships and private owners to prey on the ships of the enemy nation in a for-profit way, had become part of the culture, part of England's economy. And to suddenly say you can no longer do this left all these aggressive privateers and their ships without a job.
Worship! Worship!
So they thought, well, what do we do? We'll just go on doing the same thing, except we won't do it as agents of the state. We'll do it as pirates.
Fire!
The privateers that turned to piracy were forced to relocate by James I. They moved to harbours and ports along the south and west coast of Ireland. From these shores they could continue their profitable business of attacking the ocean's trade routes. This part of the world provided the perfect cover for their illegal activities.
It was very difficult for the governing people to control the sea peoples of the western seaboards of these islands. And that made them natural havens for pirates. It's not at all dissimilar from the situation in Somalia today.
Could the mystery ship be an English privateer that turned to piracy? Perhaps the finds from the shipwreck might provide some clues to her identity and provenance.
What we're looking at here is a musketeer's bandolier belt. It's made of leather and in very good condition. And you can see here, you'd have had the string from the bandolier strung through there, and you'd have had the whole line of bandoliers down along your torso. And generally there were 12 of them, and they were known as the 12 Apostles. The musketeer would be able to take it off, top up his gun, and then put it back together. So they would have had lead tops and probably made of wood. You can see that the musketeer has actually put notches into the belt as well. Whether these were notches of people he killed or not, I don't know. But it's just, again, it just, I suppose, makes us remember as archaeologists that we're dealing with past human beings. It points to it being not a Spanish ship, or at least the bandolier wasn't owned by a Spanish soldier or musketeer. Generally, they had their individual powder casks where they would just have it hanging from their belt. And they were bigger, triangular casks. So again, it may indicate that we're dealing with an English ship here.
Late August 2013, and the archaeological team are back on site for the last time. With a clear date ruling out the shipwreck as being from the Armada, they now need to figure out what type of vessel this was and why she ended her days off the northwest coast of Ireland. By excavating the exterior of the ship, they hope to match the vessel's size and construction to known ships from the era.
There's really good quality structural information there that should give us a really good idea of the kind of vessel it was. So you've trade across the Atlantic, you've connections across Europe, you've got plantation and people coming in from England, you've got piracy down in the high seas as well, and ships being commandeered by pirates from anywhere and everywhere. So you could get Spanish pirates who'd commandeer an English ship, hence you might have an English ship with Spanish goods on board it. So that's a real possibility. So in many ways maybe more exciting than we thought originally. Hopefully we'll be able to come up with a plausible explanation and story to do with this wreck that the evidence backs up.
With a date for the ship's construction coming after the 1590s, it is clear this boat comes from the golden age of piracy in Ireland. Few records remain on the pirates who operated in Donegal in this era. However, we do know the story of one of these former privateers who worked in another part of the island. Patrick Maya operated a small fleet of warships from a base at Crookhaven, County Cork on the southwest coast. Pirates such as Maya helped to turn Ireland into the Somalia of 16th century Europe.
The main bases in the southwest coast would have been Baltimore, Lemcon, Skull and Crookhaven. That was their pirate headquarters, their North Atlantic pirate headquarters. And they came here during the summer. During the rest of the year, they would sail south to the northwest coast of Africa, and where their winter headquarters was, and also to Newfoundland. So really, you're looking at an area of the North Atlantic there that was a tight triangle of maritime activity that was the hunting grounds of those pirates.
All along this coast, there is evidence of its pirate past. One such place is a set of smugglers' steps carved into the rocks on the cliffs near Maya's base at Crookhaven.
This site here is a prime example of what I would consider placed here purely for smuggling and piracy, because it's in a treacherous area, it's removed from any settlement, it affords you a fantastic vantage point of the ocean, wide enough just for one person, to allow access to the sea and what was coming in from the sea and going to the sea. Really, to allow it to be done in secret.
Working outside the law, the pirates had to be able to bring goods safely ashore, avoiding the watchful eye of the authorities.
Come on, boys, we have a ship to load. Get a move on!
The harbours in Ireland provided not just a ready market for their booty, but a secure base to access the shipping lanes of the Atlantic.
Their targets continue to be primarily Spanish vessels, but also French, Dutch, anything except English, because that would draw down upon them the wrath of King James, who was in theory committed to stopping it, but was content to leave it happen as long as it did not impinge upon English trade.
From Crookhaven, Maya in particular focused on attacking the ships of the new Dutch Empire.
At this stage, the Dutch are emerging as a maritime power, challenging England in the North Sea and in the Atlantic. The Dutch were also expanding and setting up their own colonies in the New World. Their ships trading between the New World and Holland were a favourite target for Irish privateers, Irish pirates operating out of the coastal towns of Cork.
As the 1600s wore on, the Dutch increasingly became the primary victims of attacks by Irish-based pirates. At the University Library of Göttingen in Germany is a unique document that attests to how concerned the Dutch were about pirates operating out of Ireland. It was only discovered in 1924. As an expert on Irish piracy, Connie is one of the few people in Europe that knows the history of the document, but she has never seen it in person. Connie travels to Göttingen to meet librarian Helmut Rolfing and reveals to him its story.
It's an amazing document to have. Yeah. It's an anti-pirate document.
Right, so it's almost a military kind of map.
Yeah, it is. It's very strategically drawn map targeted towards going in and ridding those harbours of pirates. You can see here as well that of all the harbours, they have focused primarily on Crookhaven and even given the soundings within the harbour itself coming in. So you get the feeling that when they drew this in 1612, they had specific reason.
The Dutch wanted revenge. In 1614, a fleet of ships set sail for Crookhaven.
Secure the deck, bosun. Aye, Captain.
In the harbour, Patrick Maya was preparing his fleet for another piracy raid. He had no idea of the Dutch storm heading his way.
Ships approaching! To arms, lads!
Pirates as a whole were a target of the Dutch, so Maya was unfortunately the one they picked on in Crookhaven. The Dutch had been given a commission by King James in England, and he allowed them to enter the harbours of Ireland to basically rid them of pirates. The commission stated that they were to arrest the pirates and hand them over to the local Admiralty lords.
Maya's ship was beached on the strand, leaving him helpless. With heavy fire coming from the Dutch fleet, the situation was hopeless. With his flagship on fire, he abandons ship with his son, hoping to escape the marauding Dutch. But they are waiting for Maya on the shore.
Ik heb er helemaal geen zin meer met dit gelul. Schiet ze neer.
Attacked the ships that were in the harbour, including Maya's ship. He was killed along with one of his sons, but 30 other individuals were also killed. So he basically slaughtered the community there. You're looking at what essentially was a massacre in the harbour of Crookhaven at that time.
It was the beginning of the end of Ireland's confederacy of pirates. Could the lost ship be a vessel that was engaged in piracy? Was it a victim of the changing fortunes for those maritime gangsters? We may never know the true story of the shipwreck. Whatever happened, the crew of this warship found themselves in difficulty. Perhaps they were unfamiliar with the dangerous waters around Rutland Island. If so, they would have no idea how treacherous the bay they sailed into was. They were sailing to their doom.
The wrecks are a funny thing because they're kind of a window into history, and now we have this little bit of information and we're trying to assimilate into knowledge about what was going on at the time. But at the moment it has to be fairly speculative. But from a nautical point of view, the boat's fairly far in. They almost intended to come in there. The channels are narrow, wind can be fickle, and all you need is a bit of misfortune. But although they had a different set of knowledge and a different set of skills, they would have been intimate with moving boats around. So they're just a bit of bad luck for them, I suppose. If you start to excavate it and look at it, then you're kind of responsible for protecting it for the future. They can't lift the wreck because it's too expensive. If you dig it up, you're responsible for it. It's been there through all of that history, and it belongs to the future as well as now.
The archaeologists rebury the ship to protect her for future generations. Many questions remain. The archaeology has provided clues to the background for the vessel, but for now, they must continue the hunt for the true story behind the lost ship.
It could be many, many things. What we know of from the archaeology is it's telling us that it was a medium to large armed ship, one that had been involved in some conflict. But whether it was an armed merchantman that may even have been lost, whether it was some form of warship, English-built warship, that was doing patrol work up in the northwest, or whether it was a ship plundered by pirates or a ship belonging to pirates, we don't know.
What's clear is that 400 years ago, the the ship and her crew found themselves in serious trouble.
There's a multitude of theories, but to me it looks most likely that she met her end, particularly on that reef. But in a full water with a heavy squall, there's a strong chance that it would be white water. You wouldn't see the reef too easily. Just don't know what conditions these poor sailors were facing. Hostile territory, hostile weather. Hate to think about what they went through before the ship came a cropper here.